Dr. Binelli is a professor at the Department of Animal Science from University of Florida. He was a professor at University of São Paulo for several years, and then we were able to recruit him a few years ago. So he's been a great resource for us, help collaborating several of our studies that I showed you on those previous slides at our center and other studies. So I really appreciate all of his help, and he's also a speaker that participates in a lot of our extension programs. It's highly appreciated. So thank you very much again, Mari, for being part of this, and you can go ahead and start.
Thank you, Philippe, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to speak for this audience. It was great to do it last year, and well, I think you liked it since you invited me to speak again this year. So I'm going to add to a lot of the material that the Philippe presented today with a different view, the view of the reproductive physiology. But as you'll see, many of the principles that Philippe share that the Philippe presented, I will share as well with you guys. So the title is Boosting the Reproductive Efficiency of Beef Females. Okay. And I will start just with a little with a little conceptualization about deficiency. So when you talk about efficiency, that could be a vague term. So just put a couple of very simple examples here. So for example, just so you guys get your brains warmed up a little bit, but how many cows do you need to produce 30,000 pounds of weaned calves? With two premises. First, a weaning weight of 500 pounds, and the number of calves needed equals to 60. So 60 calves times 500 pounds, that will be your 30,000 pounds of weaned calves. So do that in two scenarios. One scenario in which you get a 60% weaning rate, and that will reflect poor reproduction. In another scenario in which you get 90% winning rates, such as in many of the examples that Philippe showed, and that will be a reflection of excellent reproduction. So the answer here would be in the first scenario, if you get 60% winning rate, you need 100 cows to achieve that 30,000 pounds of weaned calves, compared to a second scenario in which you'd have a 90% winning rate, 67 cows times 90%, you'll be able to get those same 60 calves. So with much less cows, with 2/3 of the cows on the second scenario compared to the first scenario, you end up with the same number of calves and the same mass, the same weight of calves to sell, and that's your bottom line there. That's where you made your money from. So having to feed those extra 33 cows for that same amount of time, that same year, and not getting a result in terms of calves, of course, that's not good business. That's not something you want. And the conclusion here is that you may have the same total production with less cows that are more efficient reproductively. Of course, that you can see what I'm going to. I'm going to try to lead a discussion into the how can we get them to be more efficient. Just a second scenario, and that's a reality here in Florida. Two different scenarios that I'm going to put to you now. How many females in reproduction do you need if you breed versus if you do not breed yearling heifers? And although it might seem a common practice to breed as yearlings, that's not in every operation here in Florida. There are different styles, and of course people make different calculations on what's more worthwhile for their money. But I'm going to show you some numbers here for you. So here are the premises. You have 100 females in reproduction. You have a 20% replacement rate. So what that means is that every year you remove 20 of your 100 cows and substitute them for 20 heifers. A third premise is a 80% winning rate. So it is a accurate. That's a good number for reproduction. Not excellent, but it is very good and it's very realistic here for Florida. And then you win your 500-pound calf at the end. So here are the two scenarios. So if you breed yearlings, you need 60 mature cows. You're gonna have 22-year-old heifers, and you have 20 yearling heifers for a total of 100 females. And those 100 females winning at 80% efficiency will be able to provide you 40,000 pounds of calf at the end at winning. Now, if you do not breed yearlings, you're gonna need more. You need your 80 mature cows now, 22-year-old heifers, your same 20 yearling heifers they'll be needed for next year, but they're not breeding this year. So you'll have 120 females in your operation. Only 100 of them will be breeding to produce that same amount of calf weight. So the conclusion here would be that you may have the same total production with less females if you breed yearlings. So again, that's another very simple example of efficiency. So investing in the reproductive efficiency of your animals and breeding yearlings are two very simple things you can do to increase the efficiency of the system. And the increase in efficiency means overall less animals to produce the same amount of weaned calves. Less animals means less land. And you know that in Florida, that's a big pressure that the ranchers are having. Big pressure on their lands, overvalued lands. Many people want to develop those lands. Many people wanted to make those lands become houses. So we're gonna need to be more and more efficient to be able to produce with less animals and using less land. This is how we see it happening in the future. So the topics for today, I'm gonna touch in 3 different topics. They're gonna be a little bit mixed, but you're gonna see that I'm gonna talk about all of them. And the take-home messages that I will start sharing right from the beginning. First is about reproductive efficiency, and the guiding principle here is that breeding early in the season is critical to maximize lifetime productivity. In terms of heifer fertility, another topic, the guiding principle here is that puberty attainment prior to the breeding season is critical to yearling heifer fertility. And we heard about that aspect right in our prior presentation. And regarding reproductive technologies, which is one of the focus of my research and extension program, the guiding principle here is that the use of technology will benefit your cow-calf operation. It should be applied gradually. Don't jump to the most advanced technology right away. Start from the beginning and then work your way up, and have realistic expectations. So if anybody tells you you're gonna get 80% pregnancy by AI the first time, that's not realistic. If somebody says you're gonna get 40%, that is realistic. So make your calculations and then make sure that you apply the technology, but with a realistic expectation so you don't get frustrated. So I always like to start with the with this diagram, which is a diagram of the bovine reproductive cycle. This is biology. This is what we have to see to in order to be able to work out what can we do strategically in many of the different stages of this cycle. So after parturition, after birth, there'll be if we're talking about heifers, we are looking at the attainment of puberty. And that coincides with ovarian activity and estrous cycles, just like Philipe mentioned. And if everything goes right, she'll go into the context of a breeding season. She'll be inseminated or naturally or artificially, and she'll conceive, go through a gestation, parturition, and then her calf will start that cycle again. After parturition, if it is after parturition, the female will undergo a period of postpartum quiescence. That means she's not able to breed. Then she'll resume estrous activity, again, start cycling again, and then again, that should be coinciding with the beginning of the breeding season. So it's interesting that we need to see each of these stages because they're happening in the lifetime of the animal, how they repeat as a cycle, but how we need to be able to get to this point of ovarian cyclicity, and that means either achieving puberty for a heifer or resuming cyclicity for a cow, and that must coincide with the beginning of the breeding season. If it is a cow and it isn't an estrus, or if it is a heifer and she's still prepubertal at the beginning of the breeding season, and they'll need to achieve that cyclicity during the breeding season, their chances of becoming pregnant are less and less, and their chances to remain in the herd for a long time are less and less. As well. So we can use in our array of resources reproductive management tools, and I'll talk about a few of them during the presentation. So, for example, for puberty, there are strategies for inducing puberty. There are tools like reproductive tract score that can be employed so we can check for attainment of puberty. Then regarding cyclicity, we can help the reproductive system and use synchronization strategies to get them cycling. We should be focusing a lot into breeding early in the season, as I mentioned to you. We can also stimulate cyclicity using protocols of synchronization if we're talking about cows. And then during the breeding season, in order to see how good the job we are doing, we can do preg checks, strategic preg checks, not just at the end of the breeding season, but perhaps throughout the breeding season. So we'll talk about some of these strategies as we go. So regarding some of the reproductive strategies, technologies that are available, and as I mentioned to you, they are of increasing technological levels, and they can be as simple as just the control of the breeding season to very complex as doing ovum pickup, then doing in vitro embryo fertilization and embryo transfer. But there is a gradation on these strategies, and I'll go through not all of them, but a few of them. Since all of them are available at the University of Florida, we are able and equipped with the equipment and the skills to perform each one of these, but they should be employed to the Florida system systematically and again, gradually, depending on the interest of the producer and on the level of use that each of the producers have. So to start with the control of the breeding season, since it is a breeding season and that there's a time component to it, you have to see it in a longer term, not just as a single season. So here I put it as an example scenario with 2 years, year 1 and year 2, and at each of these 2 years we have a breeding season of 90 days. And then in red, we have gestation. So this is the example of a cow that got pregnant on the very first day of the breeding season. So she gestates for those 9 months and 2 to 3 weeks. Then she calves. And then in order for her to be able to get pregnant again on the first day of the subsequent breeding season, she only has a 70 to 80 days of interval. Of those 70 to 80 days, 30 days will be of uterine involution, so she's not able to breed. So that means that she has only 40 to 50 days left to get pregnant. So that's the challenge if you really want to keep a 12-month interval, is to make sure that she's cycling and she's in good condition to be able to conceive with only 2.5 or 3 estrous cycles left on the remaining of the next breeding season. So if we stretch that out, and I'm going to give you an example of two contrasting scenarios. Let's do this now for an even longer span, this time of 4 years. And for each of the years, I plotted a breeding season from February to April. These are what we do here in Gainesville in our systems. We breed them during the spring. Here's the calving season, November 15th to February 15th for each one of these 4 subsequent years. And this is a success scenario. This is the dam and the yearling heifer that are pregnant at the beginning of the breeding season of year 4. So if we start here at year 1, she calved, and then she got pregnant. Here's the dam in pink. She got pregnant on the very first day of the breeding season, and then she calved the heifer, and then she got pregnant again on the very first day of the next year, and on the very first day of the breeding season of the subsequent year. That heifer now, because she was born on the very first day of the calving season, when she reaches the breeding season of year 4, she is a 14.5-month heifer. She's cycling, and she also is very successful and gets pregnant on the very first day of the breeding season. So now on year 4 here, we have both them and her heifer bred on the very beginning of the breeding season, and that's the best scenario you can get. This is the case for this picture here. This is why I put it on the title of the talk, because this is, as you can see by her number, this is the first heifer born on the calving season that was in November of last year, and that's her mother. So these 2 ladies here, they'll have a very high likelihood of remaining in the herd for a long time and being very productive animals in their reproductive career. Now this is the challenging scenario. So this is a cow that got pregnant on the very last day of the breeding season. So when she calved, the subsequent breeding season had already started. So then her heifer, when she gets ready to be bred as a yearling on the next breeding season, she's not old enough. And she might achieve puberty, might or might not achieve puberty during the subsequent breeding season. So then, in this case, as an example, she did not get pregnant, and her mother was also not able to get pregnant again on that year number 4. So that's a challenging scenario in which you have the dam and the heifer that are now open, and they have to decide what you're gonna do. Are you either gonna cull both of them, or you're gonna be feeding them for an extra year without any produce from them? So that's a problem. And this is just an illustration as an example of how important it is to get them bred early in the breeding season, and how that in practice can affect what's going to happen in the future, in the near future of your production system. So what we do here in Gainesville, it's very simple. Is a way that you can plot these 3 main activities of your cattle for each of our categories. So what we have here is from November 2018 to November of 2020. These are real distributions here from our herd at the university. And we have here for multi-breed cows, for the multi-breed heifers, for our Brahma cows, for our Brahma heifers, and for our recipients. So if you have categories in our herd, you can use a map like this to map your activities and see how you're doing over the course of the years. So basically what we have is the calving season, the subsequent breeding season, and what happens with weaning of the calves that calved on that calving season, and then what happens in the subsequent year. And then we can see how you're doing for intervals. Are you, of course, the breeding season you control? If you control your breeding season, you should be also controlling your calving season. And then your weaning should also be within the parameters that you set. If you're interested, I'll be glad to send you a blank spreadsheet like this, so you can just put your data. And the way to set this up in terms of goals is to start with the day in which you want of weaning, and the day that most of your calves should be at least with such an age. For example, in our case was 210 days. and then you work your way backwards to, so if you want them to be weaned on that day, when should they be calved? And if you want them to be calved on that day, when should they be bred? So just project 2 days, 2 years ahead, and then keep coming back until you set up your system. Or just take your historical data and plot it, and then you can see how you're doing. Are you being able to keep the breeding season every year the same, or are you shifting from year to year? So this is just a very simple tool to visually appreciate what you're doing in terms of your management activities on your herd regarding reproduction. So as one of the first strategies after control of the breeding season would be timed bull breeding. And what this is the use of a synchronization protocol, but without inseminating your animals. So basically, you expose your animals to a synchronization protocol, and then you release them with the bulls, just like you would normally do. But now they're pre-synchronized. This is, I see that as a very first step for someone wanting to start using reproductive technologies, because it is the way to get used to drugs, used to administering these drugs at following a calendar, and it will already present you very interesting results. So this is data that for an experiment that we did in 2 years at the San Marino ranch of Mr. Ralph Palais. He's a great partner. He's been working with us since I started here in Florida almost 3 years ago. We're starting our third breeding season together now. And we use his yearling Brangus heifers, and we submit them to a synchronization protocol, which is just a CIDR, which is a progesterone releasing device for 7 days. Then we remove the CIDRs, and we injected prostaglandin in these animals. Then we checked heat for 5 days, but that was just for our research purpose. We waited for 14 days, and then we added bulls at a rate of 1 to 10. These bulls were in for the remaining of their breeding season. He was removing bulls as the breeding season was progressing. So at the end, it was 1 to 25, and we did preg checks throughout this program. And this is the result that he got. So his pregnancy rate at the first 35 days of the breeding season was 40%. By day 60 of the breeding season, almost 90% of his heifers were bred. And at the end of the breeding season, 93% were bred. Only 5 of his heifers were still open, and he achieved his goals. So here we do not have a control in which we did not use the synchronization protocol, but you can see the power of pre-synchronizing the animals and having a very large proportion of these animals bred at the very beginning of the season. And that 60-day mark is an excellent mark of having most of our heifers pregnant for them to remain in your herd as replacements and still be able to keep up with the breeding season of next year, not being too late. We also used time natural breeding in a different scenario. Here we did do a comparison, comparing animals that did not receive a protocol and animals that were submitted to a synchronization protocol. Very simple: a GnRH injection, a CIDR for 7 days, and then a prostaglandin, and then they were released with the bulls. That experiment was done in Nona together with Philipe. We used multi-parous cows, 120 cows, and here are the results. So pregnancy at 45 days of the breeding season for animals that did not receive a CIDR was 30%, and for animals that received the CIDR was 42%. So because we didn't have a lot of animals on that study, we did not make a statistical comparison, but you can see that that this is going in the right direction. That means use of a protocol, you're going to have a large number of animals able to get pregnant on the very beginning. These are cows, multiparous cows. And then at the end of the breeding season, between 87 and 91% of pregnancy. So then, but then there was no difference between the two groups. But here's the greatest advantage would be to get them pregnant early, just as we stressed before. And this is what you're able to obtain when you use a synchronization program prior to release with the bulls. Here, the bull ratio from the beginning was 1 to 25, 1 bull for every 25 cows. How about MGA? So I really like to use the cedar, and I recommend the cedar for someone that has no experience with using protocol, because you know the cedar is going in, you know the cedar is coming out, you know that it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Now, feeding MGA is much cheaper, and it is very convenient if you have a very good control of your feeding strategy. That means you know that you're offering a given amount of that MGA for the number of days that is required, and every animal has access to the feed bank and is consuming the amount of MGA that is necessary to achieve the reproductive effects that we are wanting to achieve. So it's a little bit more technical, but for people that are used to feeding their animals and have that perfected, it would be a very useful strategy. So this is what we did is some of the heifers from Mr. Wes Williamson, another producer that we collaborate with. We basically treated heifers with MGA for 14 days, starting 33 days prior to the insertion of bulls. Then then MGA was removed for 19 days. And basically we just did a comparison of injecting prostaglandin or not at the day that these heifers would be mixed with bulls. And this is the result here. So in the there was no effect of that injection of prostaglandin. The pregnancy on the first 10 days of the breeding season was between 38 and 34 and 38%. So that's very good. On the first days, like on the first 10 days, like 3 days after 1 week, 40% of almost 40% of the animals was already pregnant. And at the end of the 60th day of the breeding season, between 70 and 75%. We could not do a final preg check, but these are very, also very attractive numbers, around 72% on average, 60 days through the breeding season. So that pre-exposure to progesterone in the case of heifers is a strategy of induction, of inducing. That means the heifers that are pre-puberal, they're almost starting cyclicity, but are still pre-puberal, they can respond to that supplementation of MGA or also to a supplementation of progesterone through a cedar, and that will induce them to start cycling. And this is the kind of fertility that we get with this yearling heifers that we stimulate with progesterone. Another case that was done with heifers from the Longino Ranch at Logan Perry's facility in Okeechobee, and here we treated them with MGA again for 14 days, and then we waited for 12 days, and then they received a cedar or did not receive a cedar prior to AI. So here the idea was, can we boost even further this induction effect of MGA if we expose them to cedar? So 2 times exposure to first MGA and then to cedar, and does that influence pregnancy? So these are the results. These animals are inseminated, and just in response, again, these are yearling Brangus heifers. So the pregnancy to AI, regardless if we used or did not use a cedar, was about 47 to 48%. So that means that on the first day of the breeding season, of course they were AI'd, we got half of our animals out of our way. They are already pregnant. And then Here's the pregnancy by bull, and the final pregnancy at the end of the breeding season was like around 91%. So again, they were really happy. Once more, these are yearling heifers, and we are just trying to illustrate the potential of these heifers to reproduce very efficiently with the help of a little progesterone or MGA supplementation. So a bit further in our scale here of a reproductive technology, one thing that it's possible to do here in Florida, and we are doing that for many years at our herd here in Gainesville, is to do a AI. So every female is submitted to a single AI, and then we wait a period of time, 7 to 10 days, but that's because of our management, and then we expose them with the bull. The reason we wait is because we want to make sure we are able to detect the pregnancy from AI from a pregnancy from the bull. So we give them a little time between the AI and the bull. So this is the protocol that we use and have been using for over 10 years. It's called the Select Sync. And again, it's very simple protocol. It's a sitter for 7 days. At the day of sitter insertion, we give a GnRH. At the day of sitter removal, we give an injection of prostaglandin. Then we check heat. This is Mr. Danny Driver. He's the manager of our unit, and he diligently checks heat 2 to 3 times every day, and he will accordingly inseminate these animals about 12 hours after he observed them in heat. We do that for 3.5 days. And then every heifer that did not show heat during that interval receives an injection of GnRH and is artificially inseminated in the absence of heat. So we do AI based on observation of heat on between sitter removal for 3 days, and then the ones that are not in heat, we inject GnRH and inseminate. We do that for every animal category. And this is our results. And this is important to show because it is done in Florida. It is done with a protocol that's available to everyone, and we'll set our expectations right. So this is for our multi-breed herd. So for yearlings, we got 40% at first AI, 80% at the end of the season. For our prima pairs, 43% to AI, 80% at the end of the season. For our 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 34% at AI and 83% at the end of the season. And our multi-pairs cows, 44% in response to AI and 92% at the end of the breeding season. So those are numbers that we'll start publishing every year, so they can be used as a benchmark for any other people that are thinking about inseminating or doing AI plus bull, and they can be compared to what we get here at the university, and it will help to set our expectations to what we're able to get with this kind of management. And I decided just to more closely analyze some of the data from our herd to answer some of the questions that are common among producers. So first one, how well do cows that calved early in the calving season do in the subsequent breeding season? So we're preaching here, both me and Philipe, that's important to get these animals bred on the beginning of the season. So let's see how they do. So these are the cows that calved in November, in December, in January, and in February. As you can see, most of our cows will calve between November and January. A few cows are left for February. And again, here I'm showing data for the results of pregnancy to the artificial insemination on the first bar, and then at the end of the season on the second bar. So as you can see, as the cows calve from November to February, their pregnancy rates to the artificial insemination decreases from 44 to 32%. And the pregnancy rate at the end of the breeding season, the total pregnancy rate, goes from 91% all the way down to 74%. So what we are preaching here is shown in terms of data. That means you gotta get them bred early in the season. Otherwise, you're gonna have a problem of your pregnancy rates for the ones that calved late on the calving season. A second question that's also that's usually interesting to producers: how well does a heifer that was bred as a yearling do as a first calf heifer in terms of pregnancy? So some people in some systems decide not to breed them as yearling with the thought that it will compromise their subsequent reproductive performance, and they will wait a year and breed them as 2-year-olds. So uh, this is the performance of our yearling heifers and our primiparous animals. These are exactly the same ones. So we bred them as yearlings. They got 45% pregnant to AI and 82% pregnant at the end of the breeding season. And then how did these same animals do in the subsequent year? So their pregnancy to AI was 40%, and their pregnancy at the end of the season was 77%. So there was a 5% reduction in pregnancy on average between their performance as yearlings and their performance in the subsequent years. So yes, there is a decrease, but that's it, 5%. It's not something that's catastrophic, that's really gonna break the bank compared to having to feed all of these animals for that extra year before you get them bred. So it is important to try to get them bred as yearlings because that will probably, depending of course on your operation calculations, result in a better bottom line for you. Now, what is the dream? The dream is to do time AI. In many parts of the world, do time AI very successfully. Here in this country for dairy, it's very successful. For beef, it hasn't been very successful. And people that jump already straight to time AI sometimes get frustrated by their results. But it'll be the dream. And what does that mean? So time AI means use a synchronization protocol. You do not check heat, and you decide on a fixed time and you inseminate all of your animals on that same time. So that's what I like to do. But this is what prevents me from preaching that kind of approach. This is data from 2000. These are data from 2019 and 2020 on estrus distribution to that protocol that I showed you. So that's the proportion of heifers that will show heats 36, 48, 60, or 72 hours after we remove the seeder from the protocol. And as you can see, there is a spread. The animals are not concentrated on a single time point. So that makes it for a challenge to just choose one single time point and do time AI in all of them. So what we are trying this breeding season, again with our partner, Ralph Pelez and Stephanie Pelez, Kichobi, is to try a split time AI approach in which we'll do 2 artificial inseminations that consider this natural distribution of estrus to that protocol. And next year, I'll be able to tell you how successful we were. So it's not time AI, but instead of having to check heat every day, morning, afternoon, and inseminate accordingly, we're just gonna do 2 AIs that are programmed according to the distributions of heat and try to achieve pregnancy rates that are compatible to what we would have obtained if we did check heat every time. Now I want to share with you results from a research project that was funded by the Florida Beef Enhancement Fund through the Florida Cattlemen's Association. And it is about using puberty induction as a strategy to increase reproductive performance of Brahma-influenced heifers. So we did this in this project in 5 different ranches, ranches from the University of Florida, and ranches that are from other operations in Florida. We're very thankful to our partners, Ralph Pelez, Logan, Wes Williams, Mr. Cliff Cottington. We had a lot of support from Lauren Butler. She's the county agent from that region that helped us recruit some of these ranches to work together. Most of the work, of the evaluation work was done by Tiago. He works in my team, so I'm really thankful to him. And also for the beef units, Angela and Mariana, Dr. Ray, and Danny Driver here in Gainesville raised many of the data that I'm going to show you today. So here, I want to first to explain the concept of reproductive tract score. I know some of you people are familiar with it, but that's the evaluation of the ovary using ultrasonography and the detection of a follicle that you can see this black circle here in the ultrasound image, and of a corpus luteum, which is shown here again on this ultrasonography image, and also the evaluation of the uterus of the heifer regarding its size. So depending, and that's done here by Tiago using the ultrasound, using one of the heifers of Logan's. And then we will use criteria from the ovary and from the uterus to classify the reproductive maturity of heifers to a reproductive tract score of 1 to 5, mean 1, a pre-pubertal heifer, and 5, a pubertal heifer. Since we're working with the induction, we need to have a criteria to see if we are able to induce them and how are they doing, and depending on how they were when we started our protocol, what kind of response do they give us to the induction protocol, depending on what reproductive tract score they had on the beginning. So this is evaluation of the reproductive potential of the heifer prior to the beginning of the breeding season. So this is what we are doing reproductive tract score to check for puberty and the pubertal status prior to the beginning of the breeding season, prior to the use of a synchronization protocol. So this is the design of this experiment. It has two phases, an induction phase and a synchronization phase. And you're gonna see some familiar elements from what I've shown you before prior in the presentation. So, sorry. During the induction phase, we classify the heifers based on the reproductive tract score between puberal or pre-puberal. After we separated them according to the pubertal status, we divided them to either do not receive anything or receive a seeder. And that seeder, again, is a device that releases progesterone that has the objective to induce their puberty. So that's the induction phase. Then after that, after a 4-day period, all the heifers were enrolled in a synchronization phase. That is basically a synchronization protocol. At seeder removal, we checked heat and we inseminated them at heat, or after 3 days, the ones that did not show heat were inseminated after an injection of GnRH. Okay, so basically 4 groups: puberal, pro-puberal, and after that division, they did receive or did not receive a seeder for induction, but all of them were synchronized and artificial and had at least one opportunity of artificial insemination at the end. And then we did reg checks 30 days after AI to see which ones were pregnant by AI, and after 120 days of the breeding season to see which ones got pregnant by bull. So the first data that I want to share with you is something that you know, but then here is the actual data for you to see. So the probability of puberty according to the proportion of Brahma in their genetic composition. So as we all know, the more Brahma that's present on their genetic composition, the lowest the probability of these animals to be pregnant prior to the beginning, to be pubertal prior to the beginning of the breeding season. So each one of the circles is an animal, and we can see there is a linear negative relationship between how much Brahma is in the blood and their ability to be pubertal at the beginning of the breeding season. So this is a reality, and we are mostly working here with the Brangas 28% Brahma blood, but certainly throughout Florida, many other compositions are present, and that we know that they will affect the attainment of puberty. So coming back here to our design, two important points to keep in mind as I show you the data. First is that we did a reproductive tract score prior to the beginning of the breeding season, here on day -23. And there was a pre-breeding check for puberty attainment. And then here we did it again on day -3, which is the day that we remove the seeder and they are getting ready to be bred. And this is a pre-AI reproductive tract score check for puberty attainment. So if we were successful, animals that were not pubertal prior to induction, now they did become pregnant prior to AI. So we'll see how well we did using these two evaluations that we performed through the experiment. So this is a way to show the data that that I'm sure that you're not used to, but I like to see it like this because each one of these circles represents an animal, and they are stratified according to their reproductive tract score that we measure prior to the beginning of the breeding season. So on day -23, so they are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the first notion here is that the animals that are lighter in weight on average, they are the animals that have a lower reproductive tract score. This will be different between reproductive tract scores 1 and 3, but then between 3 and 5, there was no more difference. That means animals that prior to the breeding season that had a reproductive tract score between 3 and 5, they had a similar body weight among themselves. It's also interesting to see to observe here that there is a variation. So even within the different categories of reproductive tract score measured prior to the beginning of the season, there are light animals and there are heavy animals. So there will be heavy animals that are heavy, but have a reproductive tract score of 1. And there will be animals that are light, but will have a reproductive tract score of 5. So we have to keep in mind that variation when we think about our strategies. Now, when we look at the same data, but now we do it a little bit differently. Now, we marked as with the circles that animals that had a reproductive tract score less than 4. So that means that they were still prepubertal when we checked them on day -3. So right prior to insemination, the animals that are with a circle, they still did not achieve puberty. Now with a triangle are the animals that have a reproductive tract score of 4 or 5 right prior to breeding. That means they achieve puberty or they are just about to achieve puberty when they are getting ready to be inseminated. And again, as you can imagine, the animals that have the reproductive tract score of 1 and 2 prior to the beginning of the season, there is a smaller proportion of these animals that were able to achieve a more elevated reproductive tract score just prior to breeding. So that's the actual percentages. So 32% of the animals that had a low reproductive tract score prior to the breeding season were able to achieve a reproductive tract score elevated 4 or 5 at the moment of breeding season. And of course, as we go up on the scale of reproductive tract scores measured prior to the breeding season, the greater the proportion of animals that were pubertal right prior to breeding. And when we look at the same animals now in terms of pregnancy to that first artificial insemination, what we see is exactly a reflection of the puberty attainment that we measured on the prior slide. That is, only 17% of the animals that had a reproductive tract score of 1 prior to the beginning of the breeding season got pregnant to that AI, even after submission to a synchronization protocol. That's versus 46% of the animals that had a reproductive tract score 5 prior to the beginning of the season. And this is again consistent with what Philipe told us on the previous presentation. They need to be cycling. They need to be puberal at the beginning of the season for them to be successful reproductively. Bottom line, animals that had a reproductive tract score of 1 or 2 at the beginning, prior to the beginning of the breeding season, they got pregnant at 27% to the AI, and at the end of the season, 76% of them were pregnant. However, in comparison, animals that had a reproductive tract score of 3 to 5 prior to the beginning of the season, 45% of them got pregnant to AI, and 87% of them got pregnant at the end of the breeding season. So, one point that I want to make here is that yes, the reproductive status of the animal prior to breeding, prior to the beginning of the breeding season, will determine precisely how they will perform throughout the breeding season. And knowing what the reproductive tract score is, knowing the potential of the animals or the proportion of the animals with a low reproductive tract score or a high reproductive tract score prior to breeding season will help the producer, will help the ranchers to make management decisions to what to do with those animals. Do they want to keep them? Do they want to sell them to someone that has a later breeding season? Do they want to delay the beginning of the breeding season? Do they want to make adjustments for next year? So it is a very important piece of information that can help with the management, reproductive management of yearling heifers if they know what they are prior to the beginning of the breeding season. So based on that, I want to use this opportunity, Philipe, to let the producers know of a program that we just launched actually today, which is called the Know Your Heifer program, and is about optimizing replacement beef heifer development here in Florida. It's going to be available. It is available as of today for every producer in Florida that wants to enroll. So the need that motivated us to launch this program is to provide an extension service to producers that will enable them to make cost-effective management decisions based on the evaluation of heifers. And just one rough estimate that we did from a little survey that we took is that selling a pregnant heifer at the same time you'll be selling an open heifer will bring you $193 more if they're pregnant compared to if they're not pregnant. So that's very short term for a heifer that you not want to keep. If you want to keep that heifer, that open heifer, you can calculate the cost going to be for her to get bred next year. So it's important to get to know your animals, and because that will help you make those decisions. The objective of this program is ambitious, and it is to establish a statewide system to generate information on the reproductive potential and performance of replacement beef heifers. So what are we going to do with this program? Here are the activities that we are planning. So we will enroll ranchers to the program. We will conduct a short survey prior to our first visit to discuss plans and critical dates with the rancher. And then we will schedule 2 visits to the ranch. The first visit should be about 30 days prior to the beginning of the breeding season, and we're going to evaluate the reproductive tract score of your heifers and going to give you the results immediately to help you make decisions. Then the second visit is for doing a pregnancy test, and we propose to do that to detect the animals about 60 days prior. 6 days after the beginning of the season. So to get the animals that got pregnant on the first 60 days. So that's about 90 days after the beginning of the season, because these are your category of animals, of heifers, they'll be your best replacement heifers. However, it can be done later in the season according to the management practice that is adopted by the rancher. We'll conduct the exams, and give the results immediately to the producer. Then we will discuss with the producer what reproductive strategies would be recommended depending on their situation. And then at the end, we'll do a cost recovery for this program. What's going to be delivered to the ranch? The recording of individual animal data that's going to be provided by the producer, but we will give it back in an organized report format. We'll give an analysis report of the individual herd reproductive potential based on the RTS, an analysis and report of the individual herd reproductive performance after you get the preg test. We'll give the recommendations and for the implementations of reproductive technologies that might help solve some of the issues that we observe with the RTS and preg check. And importantly, we will do benchmarking through an anonymous comparative analysis with the other herds in Florida at the end of the breeding season. So the producer will know how she or he rank among all the other ranges that are participating. So it's going to be anonymous, nobody's going to be identified, but the rancher will know where he or she stands and where he or she wants to get on the subsequent breeding season and what needs to be done. This is a flyer for the program, and it is available as of today from your county agents. So just talk to them; they're familiar with the program, and they might help you to get set up, or just get in touch directly with me, and I can set you up with the program. Philippe, I have another short story for 5 minutes. Am I allowed to share that? Or
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So the last story I want to share with you is regarding what's in the future. What can we do in terms of reproductive technologies to help look at a bunch of heifers like these ones here, and many of them are very similar. Some of them are, of course, are smaller, and some of them are larger. But if they look the same, we know that within a herd of heifers that might look the same and weigh the same, some of them will achieve puberty earlier than others. What kind of technique can we use to try to predict which of these heifers will be the ones that will attain puberty earlier? So this is a project that, again, we did together with Angela Raluca at the beef unit that's managed by Danny Driver, and we're very thankful to be able to perform this study with the aid from the Florida Cattlemen Association, the Florida Beef Enhancement Fund. And the specific objective was to discover molecular markers from blood samples that could be used to predict early puberty in Brahma heifers. So this is what we did. After weaning, we collected a blood sample every month from these heifers. Then we evaluated them for reproductive tract score. They were submitted to a synchronization protocol, and they were inseminated, and then we preg checked them. And then after the preg check, we separated these animals in two categories. The animals that were pregnant, that means these are all Brahma heifers, Brahma yearling heifers. So pregnant heifers are heifers that did attain puberty early. And the non-pregnant heifers, and that also still had a low reproductive tract score of 2 or 3, they were considered pre-puberal heifers. So these are puberal heifers that did achieve puberty and got pregnant, and these are the heifers that were pre-puberal. They did not get pregnant, and they were still with a low reproductive tract score. And this is the result, and I'm gonna bring your attention here to this panel B. These are from the blood samples that were collected 1 month prior to the breeding season. None of these animals were puberal. They were exactly the same. When you look at them, they looked exactly the same. We selected the heifers that had very similar body weight. So not very heavy puberal or very light pre-puberal. They had similar body weights. And each of these dots here represents one animal. Each of these dots represents a composite analysis of the metabolomic profile that we measure in the blood of each of these individual heifers 1 month prior to the beginning of the breeding season. And what we can see, the message here is that the heifers, they are in this green circle here. They are the heifers that were puberal. And the red heifers are the ones that are prepuberal. But this puberal or pre-puberty status was measured at later, after the breeding season had already started. So this is the blood profiles of these animals prior to puberty achievement, and we can see that they are already different. So a month prior to the breeding season, we can see that the blood of animals that did become puberal, they group here in green, and the blood markers of animals that did not achieve puberty group here in red. So that means that yes, we are able, with a few exceptions, these 3 animals here, they are on this intersection portion, we are able to just from a blood sample and a molecular analysis predict which ones that will achieve puberty and the ones that will not achieve puberty. When we did that same analysis 3 months prior to the breeding season, then there is more confusion. There are a greater number of animals that could be classified either as will be puberal or will remain prepuberal by the breeding season. But still, there are some animals that are already different 3 months prior to the beginning of the breeding season. So that's a promising technology. We are repeating that this year, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with a panel of markers that will help us to predict puberty achievement, at least on these Brahma heifers, but maybe also in Brahma influenced heifers. So in conclusion, the reproductive and nutritional management of heifers and cows should aim to maximize pregnancies early in the breeding season. The exposure to a synchronization protocol followed by natural breeding or AI increases pregnancies early in the breeding season. The pre-breeding season evaluation of reproductive tract score provides a decision tool for heifers, and puberty can be induced by exposure to progesterone or MGA. So after this, I have to thank everybody in my lab, Cecilia, Tiago, he did most of the work with heifers, Mariana, Felipe, and Leo, they all were involved in many parts of these experiments. Many of the producers that helped us and faculty, Zoetis for the drugs that we used in the herd, in our beef research unit as a donation, and the Florida Cattlemen Association through the Florida Enhancement Board for funding of the project. Please come over and visit our operation and see what we do. Let us help you to implement any of these strategies in your ranch, and please feel free to contact me at any moment here at the department. So with that, I will open for questions or comments, and I welcome your participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mario. It was really good. We do have one question in the chat. Actually, it's 2 questions from the same person. But I'll just read it for you. So it says, Mario, what's the average age of conception for pure Brahman heifers up there? Here in Colombia, I found it at 20 months average on grazing, which makes hard to rely on replacement rate. Instead, keeping those old, efficient, or even less efficient dams seems to be a better decision. So the first question is, what's the average age of conception for those purebred Brahmans heifers in your studies?
We get about 20% of them. We get about 20% of them bred to AI as yearlings. Then they are exposed to a bull, and then okay. Now I can see the question here. Right. And then they'll get up to about 50% pregnant by the end of the breeding season as yearlings. And the 50% that remains will be bred at the next year. So if you just take an average, it's going to be 18 months. But exactly when they achieve puberty, we do not monitor for the ones that do not get pregnant to that first breeding season. We do not monitor when they get pregnant, but they will get pregnant as 2-year-olds for sure. The 50% that do not get pregnant as yearlings, they'll get pregnant as 2-year-olds.
And there's a second question from.
Yeah, I can see it now. Is it useful to use a PGF injection after CIDR during induction of heifers, considering that they are non-cycling? That's an interesting question, because some people are observing some effects of prostaglandin that's not just related to regressing the corpus luteum, but that might have an effect on the reproductive axis, on the hypothalamic hypophyseal axis. So I think that remains to be proved, but that's for sure a provocative stimulation. So I would use it.
All right, so I don't think there's any other questions, and I do want to remind everyone that both presentations will be available online on YouTube, so you can watch them in time. And please feel free to share with whoever you want to, friends, colleagues, and whoever. And we should have those videos very soon and available for you to watch it. So it seems that there's one more question.
Yep.
I might.
Oh.
I don't know. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can, Ramiro. Yes.
Okay, good. So I have a question for you. So in Brazil, we have been using the same CIDR for multiple times in the breeding season, usually 3-4 times, depending on the operation. And a lot of producers, they use the 5th or 4th, 5th time use CIDR to induce heifers for puberty. So my question is, if you have ever used CIDRs, CIDRs here in US to induce puberty, even though we know that concentration of progesterones in the CIDRs here is lower than we use in Brazil, but do you recommend or have ever used these used CIDRs before to induce heifers for puberty?
So what we are doing here, we are using for puberty induction, we are using new CIDRs across the board. Now for the synchronization protocol, then we use a third use CIDR, so CIDR that has been used 2 times. So use it for the 3rd time for the synchronization. It's more critical to have a lower progesterone during the synchronization portion of the program than during the induction. So during the induction, there's no problem to use a new CIDR with more progesterone, but for the synchronization, it'd be better to use one with less progesterone, because that will stimulate the growth of the follicle prior to estrogen ovulation.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question.
Okay, so if there's any other questions, so thank you again, Mario, for helping us and participating in this program. Again, it was really good, and hope to see you soon, and hopefully we'll start doing more of these programs. All right, so thank you very much, everybody, for joining.
Thank you, Felipe.
Thank you. Bye.